Welcome back to the Sci-Fi Shed. Tonight we're going to continue our journey into Hugo and Nebula award-winning novels. And tonight we're going to take a look at the 2001 Nebula award-winning novel in Catherine Asaro's The Quantum Rose. I do like the cover art though. It almost has that fantasy feel to it. So Catherine Asaro is a pretty intelligent woman. She has several degrees under her belt in chemistry and physics and a PhD from Harvard, out of all places. So when I came to revisit this novel after a 15-year hiatus, I sort of expected that I'd probably getting myself into a pretty hardcore, hard science fiction novel. But I was surprised to see that it's actually not that. So what I would like to do is give you a bit of a plot overview, talk to what I liked and what I didn't like in the novel, put it to the memory test like I have been doing with some of these great novels on our Hugo and Nebula award-winning ladder that I haven't revisited in years. And finally, I'll make some recommendations and rank it on our Hugo and Nebula award-winning ladder that we've got going on. So the novel is an interesting one. We find that somewhere like 4,000 years BC, there were a group of humans who were taken away from Earth into some distant planet, a planet called Raylicon. And they sort of started building their own and sort of evolved separately to what Earth did on the planet here. And they sort of went through their own journey, eventually coming to faster than light travel and interstellar travel. And whilst that was happening, Earth was doing the same kind of thing. And somewhere the two worlds sort of collided. And when man first came in contact with an alien being, we were rather surprised to find that they were actually humans. So yeah, I thought the premise was pretty interesting. So the novel follows this woman called Kanauj Aragali. And she's the governor of this impoverished province on this planet. And she's betrothed to this guy called Jax, what's his name? Irongate. And this Jax Irongate is a bit of a piece of work, right? He's basically beating her, and he's a very aggressive, very abusive person, right? But she's in this relationship with this guy, and they're going to be betrothed because she finds that unless there's a merger between this Irongate fellow, Jax, and herself, her people are just going to, because they're so impoverished, they're just going to be completely destroyed and left to starve, right? So she feels like she has to marry this guy to give her people any chance of survival. And some of her behaviors are sort of explained away because these people are genetically modified. They are the descendants of this slave stock. So they've been genetically modified to be subservient, and that's why she has some of those qualities, and it's also why Jax has some of those qualities as well, because he's sort of a crossbred, if you like. He's sort of half caste with some other authoritarian figures in the galactic past as well. So sort of it doesn't excuse their behaviors, but you sort of understand why they act a particular way. And what happens is that there's this prince, a prince of the Ruby dynasty, in a guy called Harvril Lionstar, Harvril Liongate. And he's this prince. He's very, very wealthy, and he sort of doesn't pay attention to the customs of the land. And he sees this young Kamaj come out of a lake, and he's just fixated by her beauty. And he goes and proposes a huge dowry, basically a huge wedding gift, which far surpasses any wealth that is really understood or known on the planet. So he does that because he's transfixed by her. He has a bit of a psi ability. So when he sees her, he gets sort of transfixed and he just feels like he has to see her. And I'll talk to some of the weirdness in that when I talk about some of the things that I like and don't like. So the story sort of follows to some degree the Beauty and the Beast sort of storyline, because this guy is Prince Harvril. He's sort of regarded by the people as a monster because he has to wear this mask, and I won't explain why that is. I'll leave that up to you to read the book to find out why that is. But he has to wear this mask, so people fear him, but he's actually rather gentle and really helpful with the people we find. So anyway, he does all these things which sort of cause a whole lot of conflict, and it's also almost following the first principle of Star Trek, right? The prime objective what was it called? I'm gone completely blank. You know, where the good old Star Trek folks couldn't interfere with a particular planet as far as their religions, their society, their governance, all of that kind of stuff, the prime directive, right? So almost in face of that, he sort of ignores the local customs, makes this huge gift that gets him, Kamaj and Jax into this really bad, aggressive triangle, and things proceed from there. So look, a very interesting novel, The Quantum Rose. There's quite a few things I enjoyed in the novel, and I'll talk to those in a minute. But I would like to say that this first edition print that I got here, the hardback version, the first edition print, ends with the story, ends at a certain part in the novel. But what I have seen is that there's a second part to this book that takes off from where we finish off in the first edition. So my book is really going to be based on this hardcover edition, which ends at a certain part in part one, right? So if you've read a different version of the book, I would definitely like to hear from you. But this is that first edition print, like I said, that ends in the first part. It doesn't follow, for example, subsequent adventures that good old Prince Harville gets up to. So look, very interesting novel with The Quantum Rose by Catherine Asaro. It's a strange blend, right? So it reads in many ways like a fantasy novel. In some ways, it reads like a romance novel. And in some ways, it reads like a science fiction novel. But for me, it sort of doesn't do a great job in any one of those fields, and I'll talk to why that is. But I'd like to focus firstly on the things that I did enjoy about the novel. So one of the things that makes this a science fiction novel, which may not be quite in your face when you first read it, like I mentioned in my intro, Catherine Asaro is a very bright woman, right? She has many STEM degrees underneath her repertoire. And it's not quite obvious in the way she's written the novel, which I think is a really great attribute to this particular novel. Because what it really is an allegory to quantum scattering theory. And I'll explain a little bit at a very high level what that is. Because that's really where the science fiction elements really shine in this novel. So what quantum scattering theory is at a very high level is, you know, say there's, you know, the way she describes it at the back is by having, you know, a sort of 3 different billiard balls. And you have, you know, some stationary objects, and you have this, you know, billiard ball coming at a particular momentum, hitting these objects, these stationary objects, and they scatter and either join or resonate differently. There's some kind of impact, right? There's some kind of force that is impelled on these different objects. And she goes through each chapter title talks about one of those particular theory elements, like, you know, vibrational coupling is one here, the 3 particle scattering, transition A to L. So every chapter sort of talks to those theoretical scattering theory, quantum physics theories. And what she's done, which I thought was really, really well done, it's probably the most technical of science fiction novels, but the way she's done it is the least hard science fiction novel I've read in a very long time from someone who has got that kind of qualifications behind her, right? Because what she's done is she's taken the human element to those theoretical components and turned them into the storyline. So when Jax and Kamaj first meet, the chapter heading sort of describes what that quantum theoretical state is, and, you know, how the interactions sort of impact the different characters in the novel, right? So for a very novel way, very interesting way of her demonstrating her knowledge in layman's terms, right? Like, and because she's a teacher as well. So she teaches chemistry and physics in several different universities, or at least she did. I'm not sure what she's doing these days. So I just found that really, really entertaining, a very interesting way that she's brought those really hard science fiction elements into the narrative of the story And if you didn't know, you would never pick up on it. And that's what I thought was really entertaining and really enjoyable in a novel. The other thing that I found interesting in a novel, but unfortunately it wasn't really developed, but mind you, this is the 6th book in this the Skolian Empire series that she has. And I have not read the others, so take that for what it may be, that this is the 6th book. But, you know, she does talk to, there's an element in the novel where, you know, these humans were taken away from Earth in 4000 BC into some remote planet, and life, you know, continued there, and they eventually found starflight and finally came into contact with humans. I thought that element of the novel was a very interesting one, but it didn't go into great depth in this novel, and I suspect it's because it is probably one of the earlier novels where she really explores that idea. But I really like that idea. So if you know for sure what book in the Skolian Empire that story sort of is expanded on, I'd love to hear from you, because I'll be interested in reviewing that aspect of the story. So I did find that bit enjoyable as well within the novel, but like I said, it wasn't really expanded into great detail at all. The other thing that I found interesting, on this remote planet, they've so much like they're living in the 1600s, right? So they don't really have electricity, everything is candlelit, but they still hold on to the fact that at some point in their history, they did have things like electricity. And it's really interesting the way they refer to things like current as almost like this godlike state that, you know, with spirit of some sort that is ever present and can somehow, you know, it's almost like a theodic view of current. And also the priestess in this particular religion walk around with these large robes which have you know, circuit diagrams embedded on them. And I just thought, you know, little elements like that I found very enjoyable in the novel, which again, I suspect I elaborated on in some of the previous works in her series here. So some of the things that I didn't enjoy in this novel, right? Now, to call it a science fiction novel, yes, big tick. Like I said, I enjoyed that quantum physics, how she broke it down to layman principles, and how she incorporated those human characteristics to encompass a very difficult, technically challenging, I mean, we're talking quantum physics, right? And she's broken them down and given them human qualities. I thought was very admirable, real well done. But when it comes to, you know, is it a romance novel? Then yeah, no, it's not a romance novel. I've seen it mentioned online that, oh yeah, great romance novel. But I can't take any romance away from this novel. I don't find it in any way, shape or form romantic to be in a relationship, an abusive relationship, in the one that she had with Jax, where he was beating her up and emotionally and physically abusing her. So there was nothing romantic about that. Her relationship with good old Havril was not much better at all, right? The first thing he said to her was that when I saw you coming out of the river, it took everything I had not to basically jump on you. I think he may even have said rape. I can't exactly remember what the words, but that was what was implied. That, you know, he was so taken by her that he took everything he had not to basically rape her. How can you call that romantic? Mate, so that for me was just, it just did not hit the mark. There are elements of romance, but I just couldn't get over that bit of abusive mental and physical abuse, right? And the victim in Camoj, we understand why she was acting that way because of her genetic makeup, but it still doesn't. I just struggle calling it a romantic novel, right? So the other thing that really didn't quite hit the mark for me was the character development. I just found the characters all pretty single-faceted, right? There was nothing really complicated about the characters. They didn't go through any huge transformation. The way they started out the book pretty much is the way they ended up in the book, but a small little change in Havril when it comes to some of his addictions that he's struggling with. But apart from that, yeah, there was no real great character development. I'll take that with a grain of, take that for what it is though, because like I said, this novel ends on the planet that they're on here, but I do understand that there's other versions of this novel that sort of follow Prince Havril to his own world and things go on from there. So maybe that is why perhaps some of the characters were not quite as expanded as I would have liked to have seen them. But there was really nothing that I sort of took away from the characters as memorable or fascinating or interesting at all. The other thing that didn't quite hit the mark for me was the ending of the novel as well. Without giving away too many spoilers, they basically end up in a courtroom. And I remember reading through and I think, well, you know what, there's not much left in this novel. There's really not much left at all. And I can't see how you're going to summarize this and get to an ending that is just not going to seem rushed. And I was given it the benefit of the doubt right up to the last page. But unfortunately for me, it ended exactly like I thought. Hey, you haven't really given yourself enough time to come to a conclusion here. And you've left a bit of some open-ended questions for me. And it wasn't quite, it felt rushed to me. I just didn't really quite, it's not that I didn't enjoy the ending, even though it was a bit gag-worthy, the very last couple of sentences, mind you. I think the romance element went a bit to Catherine's head. I really didn't enjoy the last paragraph or two of the novel. I bet it was a bit too much for me. But the whole court case scene just felt very rushed for me as well. So look, taking all that into consideration, I still really thoroughly enjoyed this novel. I picked it up and I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it all the way through. I read it in very quick time. I think it took me 2 or 3 nights to read through this book, which, what is it? It's not a large print book, but it's nearly 400 pages, 300 odd pages, 380 pages. And I read it in 2 or 3 nights, right? And I think the reason is it's because it's not overly complicated, right? The storyline is not complicated. The plot is not complicated. The characters are not complicated, which makes it for a quick, fast, and enjoyable read. So look, all up, I did enjoy it. But I did think it could have been a lot stronger than what it actually ended up being. So when it comes to the memory test, unfortunately, this one did not pass the memory test for me. I read it, like I said, about 15 years or so ago, and I couldn't remember any of it. I couldn't remember the concept. As interesting as the concept is, getting those quantum scatter theory into human characteristics, I did not remember that concept at all. And also the plot, right? I just really didn't remember anything about the plot. I couldn't really remember what the story was about. And the characters were more than forgettable. I just did not remember one single character in this novel. But it didn't really take away from my enjoyment, right? And this is the thing when we're critiquing these wonderful novels, right? They're all worthy winners. And I think Catherine Asaro's The Quantum Rose is definitely no exception. I think it was a worthy Nebula Award-winning novel for 2001. I found it an enjoyable read. But we're measuring them up against some absolute monsters in the genre, right? And for me, I don't think it quite hit the mark when it comes to some of the others on the board, and we'll go through those in a minute as to why I think that is. Recommendations. So who would I then recommend, having said all of that, who would I recommend The Quantum Rose to? Look, I think if you're a quantum physics person, I think you would really enjoy this novel. And especially if you've been one of Catherine Asaro's students in the past. I think, I'll be very surprised if some of her teaching style hasn't made itself into this novel. So I'd love to hear from you. If you were ever one of Catherine's students and you've read the book, I would love to see your thoughts on it. So yeah, I think if you're into physics at all, I think you will enjoy it. I think there is still enough of a fantasy element in this novel to appeal to fantasy readers. Because the science fiction, like I said, is masquerading, right? You don't really see it as science fiction. So I think if you're a fantasy person, you will enjoy The Quantum Rose. If you're a romance person and you're into romantic novels, I don't know, I would say tread with care. This novel may have some triggers for some people, right? Maybe I should have put that right up the front as well. this novel may have some triggers for people. So be careful of that when it comes to domestic abuse, right? It's a very serious thing. Okay, so let's take a look at our sci-fi shed ladder and see where this one's going to rank tonight. So back to the shed ladder and ranking tonight's 2001 Nebula Award-winning novel in Catherine Asaro's The Quantum Rose. Now, it was a novel that showed a lot of promise, but unfortunately didn't quite deliver on that promise. So I don't think it's going to sit on the A side tonight. So just a quick recap. We got our Hugo and Nebula Award-winning novels ranked in ascending to descending order as I come across them. We're still leading the charts, June through to Red Shirts on the A side, and on the B sides, Flowers for Algernon down to the 5th season. I don't think it's going to be on the A side, so I think we can go straight to the B side and have a bit of a think as to where we're going to rank tonight's great novel. Remember, these are all great novels, right? So it's an interesting one because it did fail the memory test for me considerably. I just could not remember the concept at all, and the characters really didn't. I couldn't remember the characters at all. So from that point of view, I'm probably going to start with something like Babel 17. And the reason I say that is because for me, Babel 17 was a very strong conceptual piece of work. That linguistic relativity and how language could be used as a weapon, I thought was a brilliant concept in Samuel R. Delaney's Babel 17, which is in stark contrast to what we have in Quantum Rose. Even though I thought the idea was brilliant and I really enjoyed the way she brought a very complex quantum physics into human traits and qualities, I thought was wonderfully done. So very interesting concept as well. But it didn't last the test of time. I think when you're reading the novel, that quantum physics element is not very noticeable, right? You don't know that she's doing it, which is a strength, and I think a cost that she's suffered when it comes to our Hugo and Nebula award-winning ladder, because that concept is so well done, the way she's broken it down and put human characteristics to it, that it sort of loses the impact of just how hard of a science fiction novel in theory it really is. So really admirable work. But as a concept, it didn't quite work for me. So I'm going to say it wasn't as strong as Babel 17. I probably enjoyed reading it a little bit better than I did Babel 17. And I really didn't like the ending of Babel 17, nor can I say I really enjoyed the ending of this novel either. So the two, interesting place to start. But I'm going to have to give it to Babel 17 as just conceptually a little bit stronger. I had the similar kind of critique about the characters in Quantum Rose. I don't think they were very well developed or strong, which was sort of the same kind of scrutiny I applied to Babel 17. But I'm going to say Babel was a much stronger concept. Is it going to be better when Relate the Sweetbird sang? This one's a bit interesting. And the reason I say that is because Relate the Sweetbird sang was a really good novel. It was a very well written novel, and I remember really enjoying it at the time. But I thought the concept wasn't really strong. I mean, I wasn't captivated by that idea of clones, and there were some discrepancies in the storylines that it didn't quite gel together for me. Those three sort of almost short stories. It almost read like a fix-up novel, like we sort of talked to several weeks back on this channel, right? It almost reads like a fix-up novel. But I did enjoy Relate the Sweetbird sang more than I did Catherine Asaro's The Quantum Rose. I did enjoy Relate Sweetbird sang. Conceptually, I thought it was okay, but not the strongest novel. But I did like the characters, and I did love Kate Wilhelm's writing. I think there's a lot to say for Kate Wilhelm. So I'm going to have to just give a slight edge to Relate the Sweetbird sang over The Quantum Rose. But that's not to take anything away from Quantum Rose. I really did enjoy that novel as well. This is one of those classic novels for me where it's not ranking very highly on the sci-fi shed ladder, but it's still a very enjoyable read and a highly recommended read. Hey, have you read it? Have you read other of the Skolian Empire series? It swept my appetite. Like, I remember the first time I read it, I sort of left it at that. I wasn't excited to follow up with some of her novels. But this time round, I'd have to say, after a 10 or 15 year hiatus, I've seen a little more to what this novel could potentially offer. And I think that offering may be in some of the previous works in that Empire series, Skolian Empire. So yeah, I'll be interested. If you've read one, would you recommend another one of Catherine Asaro's work? I suspect that she would write an absolute killer hard science fiction novel. So if you can make any recommendations there, I'm definitely intrigued and I would definitely like to read some more of Catherine Asaro. But that's where we are tonight. We're getting there. Quantum Rose, Catherine Asaro. Enjoyable read. Didn't quite live up to the promise. I've been Peter. This has been the Sci-Fi Shed and I'll see you next time in this shed.